Hi, everyone. This is Max from RDLA, and we're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar today. Thank you guys all for being on the call. I do think it's important for us just to take a moment to acknowledge what happened in Alexandria earlier today, because obviously several members of Congress and their staff were involved in the shooting there. So we're all hoping that no one was life-threateningly injured, and that everyone recovers as quickly as possible. So obviously not a great way to start the day, but on a positive note, we do have a very full agenda today, and lots of folks on the call have made time to join us, so we're really appreciative for everyone who's joined and for everyone who will be speaking today. Grant, if you go to the next slide. So as I said, we have a packed agenda, and I wasn't kidding. So I'm not even going to read through the whole agenda here in the interest of saving time, but I'm going to have Sabah jump in momentarily here. I do want to let folks know that if you're speaking today, again, we're going to try to limit your remarks to 5 minutes, and if we feel you're going much over that time limit, we do have the power to mute you, and I'm not afraid to use it. No, I don't want to do that, so just please try to keep your remarks within that 5-minute window. And if folks on the line, if you guys have questions, I know in the past we've done this thing where we've unmuted all of the lines and tried to give people the opportunity to ask them over the phone. This time we're going to do something a little different just to help move things along. And so if you have a question, you can just submit them using the chat function, or if you're in the room in person, you can ask them that way as well. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Sabah to introduce herself as the new program director for RDLA. Go to the next slide. Sabah, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I hope everyone can hear me properly. But I just started as the new program director of RDLA on Monday, and before that I was actually at ACRO, the Association of Clinical Research Organizations, where I did government and industry affairs on behalf of the CROs, and before that I was at the Alliance for Health Reform, where we educated congressional staff about different health policy topics. So I'm really excited about working on this from the patient side of things in the rare disease community.
Great, thank you, Sabah. Very excited to have you on board, and thank you for stepping up and allowing us to put you on the spot really on your third day in the office. So very excited to do. I think we're going to start our next speaker, which is Steve. Steve, are you on the line, or are you there in person? Okay, give us just a minute while we find.
Sorry.
Kind of like Steve
is training.
Steve, are you there?
Yeah, I was just saying lobbyist in training.
Oh, okay, very good. We can hear you, which is a good sign. Hang on just one more second.
Sure.
Line you're on. Okay. Yeah, it's a little hard for us to pick out your line, so I would just ask that for others who are on the call to please keep your line muted. And Steve, in the meantime, please feel free to take it away.
Okay, very good. I'm not used to doing 5 minutes, but I'm committed to. First slide. I think most of you have heard me before on the topic of Food and Drug Administration. For many of you who primarily focus on NIH, which will be many of you, our belief from the very beginning a decade ago is that a strong NIH needs a strong FDA, and that a strong FDA needs a strong NIH. That want to affect disease, you need to be there and strong on all parts of product life cycle. Relatively small, underfunded agency, 100% of drugs, devices, 80% of the food supply. And here's a new number that we haven't been using. We've talked about being 20% of all consumer spending. is regulated by the agency. That comes out to a neat $4 trillion. Other things that, go beyond the traditional view of FDA, it's essential to the economy. Most FDA-regulated industries have favorable balances of trade, and unless you're in a very small segment, which I've been in and out of a couple of times, FDA has an enormously important role in homeland security. We'll talk in a minute, we'll talk more about user fees because it's a hot topic this year with the reauthorization cycle and the President's proposal. What you need to know first and foremost is user fees were always meant to supplement the appropriation and pay for specific purposes. They are not available for general needs. Next slide. Next slide. Even the manner in which FDA grows is different than other agencies. To pick on NIH for a second, the number of great research proposals, the number of researchers, the number of institutions seeking money grows, and the opportunities grow to combat disease and condition. FDA's mandate grows in other ways. First and foremost, Congress keeps giving it more to do, and that's sort of displayed here for the last 7-8 years. And then in addition, globalization has made a major impact on its FDA's responsibilities. Scientific complexity, which I usually talk more about, but I can't in 5 minutes, but suffice to say that your average new drug application is extraordinarily more complicated and complex than it was 10 years ago. Promoting innovation, public health emergencies, and growth of industry. All the FDA industries are growing. That's a good thing for patients in need. It's a good thing for the economy, but it means more pull on FDA resources. Okay, next slide. Next slide. Okay. Here's normally over the last, in most years, the user fee agreement has set the amount of user fees for the 5-year cycle, and you're able to talk solely about whether or not the budget authority appropriations is growing. Two things happened a little different this year. This is the reauthorization year that only comes up every 5 years for user fees. It is also the first time that one administration has negotiated the deal and another administration needs to decide whether it wants to live by that deal. That's come up, in fact, because President Trump has proposed to take a substantial chunk, over $800 million, out of budget authority and replace it with about $1.2 billion, actually about $900 million a year in new user fees that had never been negotiated, were completely outside the 2-year negotiating window. And so for the first time in a number of years, we have a public, visible conflict being laid out between budget authority and user fees. The President wants to trade one for the other. The committees of jurisdiction have said, we are not upsetting the 2-year deal, so user fees will be what's been negotiated and they are not open to further increases. What that will do, however, is leave a situation with the President's budget request. Budget authority appropriations will be significantly less than the reality because he'll be asking for a lot of user fees that aren't going to happen. Next slide.
Hey, Steve, this is Max. Just so you know, we have about 2 more minutes left for you.
Okay, I'm moving. I'm not going to go over this slide in detail, but please don't hesitate to give me a call. What this basically shows is the way in which the President's request impacts budget authority versus user fees, and the fact that there will be some increase in user fees, but that much of what the President is asking is about $800 million in user fees that aren't going to happen. That leaves a situation where on paper in the President's request, it's about a 4% increase, but the reality is it's about a 24% cut for the agency if the President's budget were to be implemented without the user fees, and it will be without those extra user fees. Next slide. The goals for this year then have become fairly direct: advocate for the vital mission, urge Congress to sustain the budget authority appropriations, particularly because the user fees aren't going to come, and they shouldn't. We have both practical objections, they're not going to arrive, but also principle that user fees are not supposed to replace budget authority. And then there's a challenge on the food side as well. Next slide. Just some good points that you may be able to use in your advocacy. The budget authority appropriation, that is the taxpayer portion of the FDA budget, is $8 per year per American. It's really quite modest compared to the benefits that FDA produces. Next slide. Another way of measuring this, FDA is in Montgomery County, Maryland. The school system has almost as much money to spend from the taxpayers as FDA does. That's illustrated here. Next slide. The point that I want to emphasize, because again, it's different than maybe NIH, which many of you work on, is FDA is staff intensive. It's not grant or contract driven, and as a result, even small changes immediately go to the heart of the activities of the agency. More than 80% of the staff cuts, more than 80% of staff costs are personnel related. If resources aren't there, bad things start to happen, food less safe, drugs and devices will be slower, and it'll start to conflict with promises that have been made to your organizations and many others about getting new therapies to market. And something that affects all of us, problems with imports and globalization. Last slide, which is just a summary I'll put up while I'll see if there are questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Steve. If anyone has a question, again, you can submit it using the chat function today because we have so many people on the line. Yeah, it's just much smoother for people to submit questions that way. I also see Steve has included his contact information there as contact info. So I'm not seeing any questions via the chat function. So if you guys have follow-ups for Steve, you can email him at the address there or even call him. So again, thank you, Steve, for joining us. I think we'll move on to our next speaker now, who's Rebecca Abbott from the March of Dimes. Rebecca, I think you're in the room with everyone.
I am. Thanks.
Great.
Moving into microphones for me. Sorry. Very exciting. Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Abbott, and I am the Deputy Director of Federal Affairs for the March of Dimes. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today about budgetary threats for federal newborn screening programs. I have the privilege of running an informal coalition of newborn screening advocates with my partners at the Muscular Dystrophy Association, and we are grateful to the Every Life Foundation for being a part of that coalition and for all of the work they're doing both at the state and federal level to promote newborn screening. In the United States, newborn screening is a federal-state partnership. Each state runs its newborn screening program, kicks in money for it through fees and through other funding sources. They choose which conditions they'll screen their newborns for. They develop their own follow-up systems. It's really a state-run program. The federal government has 3 programs that are specifically authorized to support states in their efforts, and these are really efforts that aren't duplicative, but they are enhanced, improve the quality of state newborn screening programs, and improve their efficiency. So I just want to make that point because it'll bring it up again whenever we go on to the next slide. As I noted, there are 3 federal programs that support state newborn screening programs. I'll talk about them in order. The first is at the CDC. All of these programs, by the way, are authorized by the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act, and they're authorized through 2019. The CDC has the Newborn Screening Quality Assurance Program. It's run through their Environmental Health Laboratory, and they're really responsible for helping state public health labs develop tests for new screening conditions, make sure that the screens for current conditions that states are screening for, whether it be Pompe or XALD or any of the screens that have been on the panel for a while are accurate. So states will send specimens to them to test to make sure that their tests are working. And they help develop tests for new conditions that might be potentially added to state newborn screening panels. That's funded at $9.65 million in fiscal year 17. That's $8.4 million for general purposes and another $1.25 million that's specifically carved out for implementation of SCID screening. The next program is administered by HRSA, that's the Health Resources and Services Administration, and it's really, that program is funded at $13.9 million, and about $2 million of that is directed towards implementation of SCID screening. The HRSA programs are really about helping states improve their newborn screening system. So one of the things that the HRSA grants have focused on recently is improving timeliness, so the amount of time from whenever you're screened in the hospital to whenever you get your results. There were some issues with that a few years back that led to some adverse outcomes for infants because they weren't getting their screens fast, the results from their screens fast enough. So that's an example of some of the work they do. They run regional collaboratives and really work on helping states have the necessary technical expertise and assistance to do their jobs better and to share best practices across states. Another important thing that HRSA supports, and you guys I'm sure know about, is the Advisory Committee on Heritable Disorders in Newborns and Children. And that's the federal advisory committee that recommends to the Secretary to add conditions to the recommended uniform screening panel, or the RUSP. And so as folks know, there's 34 conditions on the RUSP, and some are currently under consideration. So that's really kind of their claim to fame function and one of their important ones. The third program that is funding newborn screening programs is the Hunter Kelly Newborn Screening Research Program. That's at NIH. It's funded through the National Institute is singular there, I apologize, of Child Health and Development. And there's not a specific line in NICHD's budget, but they help do pilot screenings for if you want to add a new condition to state panels, and they kind of work on cutoffs and genetic issues and the basic research. So next slide, please. So generally, these programs are pretty bipartisan and well supported. We have seen some bumps in recent years, so we feel like newborn screening is well supported. The President's budget includes cuts to these programs, and I'm going to go through them quickly. I call this the good. The Newborn Screening Quality Assurance Program is I would say, held harmless in the President's budget. There was a cut of $256,000 to the overall environmental health laboratory line. I would say that's a rounding error because the budget was based on not the fiscal year omnibus, but the fiscal year CR. So that to me is a rounding error. That program's held harmless. The coalition asked for a pretty significant increase to the CDC's budget this year with the justification that additional funding is needed to implement the 3 screens added to the RUSP in recent years and some that are coming down the pike. So we would argue that current funding isn't sufficient, but in this fiscal environment, I guess you take what you can get. So I would say that's the good. We'll move on to the next slide, the bad. As you all know, NIH is slated for a $7.2 billion cut in the President's budget. As you all know, NIH has broad bipartisan support. I don't envision that happening, but $348 million of that would come from NICHD. What that means for newborn screening programs will be a matter of prioritization, but it is a threat to that work. We'll go on to the next slide, and I'll call this the ugly. The President's budget at HRSA for the Heritable Disorders Program completely eliminates the Heritable Disorders Program. It's one of 5 programs that are eliminated at HRSA for a net decrease in funding for those programs, the Maternal and Child Health Bureau, of $78 million. The budget justifies those increases by saying that states may continue to support these activities with their Maternal and Health of Child Block Grant. And they provided about a $25 million bump for that. I would say you can't make up the programs with that little of an increase, and I also would argue, and we will argue to congressional lawmakers, that it doesn't take into account the important functions of these programs to collaborate across states and to provide technical assistance and support. Importantly, for the work that the Every Life Foundation has done, it would eliminate the Secretary's Advisory Committee. As you guys may know, the RUSP is linked to some of those bills that they've been supporting in states, that whenever conditions are added to their RUSP, they are automatically added to the state's newborn screening panel. If the Advisory Committee is not there to make the recommendations, I don't know what would happen to that. So I've asked the HRSA administrator if he has any plans for if such a cut were to happen, what would happen to the Advisory Committee, and he said that they're still working on that. So we can go on to the next slide. As you all know, the President's budget is the first step in the process. The President proposes and Congress disposes. Many have said that this budget is dead on arrival, but if your program is slated for elimination or a cut in the budget, that is a cause for concern and a cause to raise your voice. Additionally, we are in a very tough fiscal environment. Sequestration is returning this year, and there's some mandatory required spending for things like veterans health care benefits that are really going to put a squeeze on the funding available for discretionary health programs. So even though these programs are bipartisan, they are under threat. It's important to note that Congress is behind schedule. There's only 45 more working days in the fiscal year. And so whether or not they even pass appropriations bills in the budget is up in the air, but we will continue to be vigilant and advocate for these programs. Next slide. As I noted, newborn screening is popular. We've been working with the coalition. We had a fiscal year 2018 stakeholder letter, which we had 12 signers. We're working on a new letter that we'll be putting out there to oppose budget cuts, and we hope to get some more signatures. Senator Gillibrand from New York is a Democrat, and she led a congressional sign-on letter to appropriators. We were happy to see it had 8 Democratic co-signers who would have liked to have seen it be bipartisan, but again, we'll take what we can get. We also have supportive members and appropriators both in the House and the Senate. Senator Hatch, Congresswoman Royba Allard, who are the sponsors of the Newborn Screening Safe Lives Act, continue to be active on this issue. That being said, there's still work to do, so if you guys have any interest in newborn screening, I encourage you to reach out to your members and let them know about the importance of these screening for catching rare diseases, whether they're on the current newborn screening panels or could be in the future. And that is my update. So if you guys go to the next slide, it has my contact information, and I'm happy to provide any additional information and help you guys advocate if you're interested in doing so.
Great. Thank you very much, Becky. Thanks for sharing all those news updates. Certainly appreciate you joining today, and would encourage folks to get engaged with March of Dimes and certainly join the coalition, because we definitely have work cut out for us around newborn screening, not only at the state level, which you'll hear more about later in the webinar, but certainly at the federal level as well. We did have one question come in actually about the previous presentation, about Steve's presentation regarding FDA, and the question was about just kind of a general explanation of what user fees are and who pays them. Just so everyone is aware, the FDA's budget is comprised of tax dollars as well as user fees, which actually come from industry. So when industry submits an application for investigational new drug or to actually market a new drug, there's typically fees associated with that, and then there's other fees that industry pays as well that actually requires that FDA hit certain review milestones to ensure that the agency is doing the reviews in the most timely way possible. So hopefully everyone's clear on that, and if it's still not clear, you can definitely find more at the Alliance for Stronger FDA's website. So with that, I want to move to our next speaker, who's going to be talking about a newly formed caucus, actually, at the state level in California. So I'm going to turn it over to Angela. Angela, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. Go for it.
Great. Good morning from California. My name is Angela Ramirez Holmes, and I am the president of CalRare, a new foundation that is trying to bring together a coalition of rare disease stakeholders with a goal to raise awareness among the general public and decision makers regarding rare diseases. I started getting involved because this is my son, Andrew. He is 12, and he has a rare brain condition that we discovered when he was 8 when it ruptured. It's an arterial venous malformation, or AVM. His is life-threatening and inoperable. And so after getting through the critical period with Andrew, I decided I needed to get more involved. And I have previous California state legislative experience and thought that it was with a partnership with the Every Life Foundation, really started to focus on California. Next slide, please. So why California? Well, we estimate 3.95 million people with a rare disease, half of which are children. Has a large patient community. There are over 300 patient organizations here in California, more than 2,500 biomedical companies and institutions, hundreds that currently work on rare disease, and California leads the world in life science research and development. The majority and minority leader are from California, and does pretty well in rare disease policy, certainly on the NORD honor roll, as well as last year unanimously passing the newborn screening bill. Next slide, please. So, oh, sorry, I already talked about CalRare, so we'll just move past that. So we have decided to try and institute a rare disease caucus, much like is happening on the congressional level, but specific to the California State Legislature, a full-time legislature. And they have health committees in both sides of the House. So as you know, rare disease public policy isn't political, it's personal. So we have wanted to form a bipartisan, bicameral caucus that would bring both public and legislative awareness, educating both legislators and staff about rare disease policy issues. I think there was a number of items when we were advocating for newborn screening last year that came up in terms of what legislators and staff do not know. In addition, we've been working on this for a year, so when we were trying to get it started last year, the comment was, well, we already have a caucus on infectious diseases. How is this different? Yes, that would indicate exactly why we need a rare disease caucus. And so we want to make sure that legislators and staff know about these issues. And while California does pretty well in rare disease policy, we think there's definitely room for more as well as innovation, but mostly awareness about the patients and making sure patients have a voice in shaping policy and are there to testify as budget discussions happen about health. This is certainly an opportunity for the legislature to engage with rare disease community, patients, academia, biopharmaceutical industry, other government agencies. Next slide. And so just last week on Monday, we were approved by the Speaker of the Assembly, and we have two co-chairs, Assemblymember Rob Bonta, Democrat from Oakland, and Assemblymember Brian Mainshine, a Republican from San Diego. So we are super excited to finally get this off the ground. Next slide, please. So our goal for 2017, again, just approved last Monday, NORD was having a California advocacy event last week where we were able to, in our legislative visits, make the ask. So our goal is 20 assembly members and 10 senators for this term. That's a quarter of the legislature. Ambitious, but we're on our way. Actually, in the parentheses on the slide, you can see the assembly members who've already joined the caucus, again, with only 1 week under our belt, and we've had additions since the slide was submitted, Assemblymember Levine and Senator Glazer. So we also have a goal to hold one briefing by the end of the term, which usually is the end of August. So we're going to be working in the coming weeks with the co-chairs to hold a briefing about healthcare needs of rare disease patients and trying to really start those awareness and advocacy goals. Next slide, please. So how to help? We would like, you know, if you're in California, we'd love for you to ask your state assembly member and state senator to join the Rare Disease California Caucus. If they're on the list, we'd love for you to thank them. And if they're not, we would really like for them to join. We feel that this is a very important opportunity that we don't want to miss about communicating the needs of our community and trying to advance policy that will be beneficial, and is certainly access to social services for rare disease patients. That's pretty much it. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Angela, for all your hard work and starting up the caucus, and would certainly urge people who are living here in California to take action so we can really build out the caucus and make it as robust as possible. So with that, I want to turn it over to our next speaker. Annie, are you on the line? Give us just a second here, and we'll get your line unmuted. Hey, Annie, can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. That other line who are not really helpful.
You're breaking up, Max, with that other line unmuted.
I'm in a very quiet place, so I'll just talk over the background noise. Okay, so I'm talking about the Benefit Act today, which has a snazzy acronym that I can't take credit for, which is the Better Empowerment Now to Enhance and Improve Treatments. Can everybody hear me? Because I know there is some noise on the line.
Yep, you're coming. Bye.
Hello?
We can hear you, Annie.
Okay, all right, I'm just going to keep going. Okay, can we go to the next slide? So the Benefit Act has been introduced in the Senate, and I'll talk at the end about the pathway forward. The Benefit Act is actually short and sweet, and the legislative text for the Benefit Act is actually shorter than the one-pager that describes it. And so I just want to explain what it is and how we got to it. So I think probably everyone on this call is very familiar with the elements of PDUFA that really open the doorway for patient-focused drug development, and a lot of our organizations have been really innovators within patient-focused drug development and have developed a lot of the tools of engagement, we like to call them, with working with
Annie, we lost you.
Hello?
All right, you're back.
Okay. And create some of the patient engagement data that helps inform the product review when working with regulators at the FDA. Can we go to the next slide? Hello? Hello?
Keep going, Annie. We can hear you. I think
okay.
For the slide
so
change.
Can you go to the next slide for me?
I think
next slide? Okay. So then I'm just going to keep talking. So then in the 21st Century Cures Act, there are a number of programs and policies that help to evaluate benefits and risks of potential therapies and gather and assess patient perspectives. So again, we see this momentum of PFDD and patient engagement continuing to be pulled through the patient and product development space, which we're really grateful for. And then in PDUFA 6, we are strongly supportive of PDUFA 6, as are I think probably all of the groups on this call. And there are many elements of the existing legislation that will continue to enhance the way that patient groups can engage with industry and the agency throughout the drug development process. But as we were looking at all of these pieces of legislation that have really helped to move the needle as we work to codify patient-focused drug development as a part of FDA's mission, we realized that the actually key flagship metric for looking at benefit risk does not yet incorporate patient experience data. So can you go to the next slide? So this is the current FDA benefit risk framework. This is the agency, as everyone knows, this is the agency's signature tool for evaluating benefit risk, and it currently does not have to incorporate data from the patient perspective. And as we all know, that's data that could be critical to informing the agency's evaluation of a product. So let's go to the next slide. And maybe we'll just go to the next slide. And these slides will be made available to everybody. I'm just trying to make this short and sweet, as I promised Hannah I would. So what the Benefit Act does is it amends the FDCA to include patient-focused drug development and related data into that benefit risk framework. And that could be data that's developed by a product sponsor or a third party, such as an advocacy organization or an academic institution. And that data then could be included in the benefit risk framework to help inform the review of a product. We were intentional in the legislation that we did not overly prescribe how that gets incorporated into the VR framework. So we did not say that the 3x5 grid has to become a 3x6 grid, and we did not say take one of those boxes and just add PFDD and related data. That is up to in the details when implementation occurs. So we were intentionally broad, but we really do believe that this will send an important signal to stakeholders that patient experience data and PFDD data will be fully incorporated into the agency's review process. We think that this will integrate nicely with existing guidance that's being developed around the quality of the data that will be that is developed as far as PFDD is concerned that came out of 21st Century Cures. And it will continue to encourage sponsors and other entities to continue to create scientifically and rigorous, meaningful tools and data. So next slide. So we have reached out to a lot of our coalition partners for support on the Benefit Act. These are the groups that have currently signed on to support this, and you'll see some of you here. If you have not yet had an opportunity to join us in this coalition support and you're interested, my email is at the end, and we would love for you to join. We have not received any pushback from any of the major groups. And as I think many of you know, Faster Cures doesn't formally sign on, but they were supportive. We've vetted this with bio and pharma. They have not sent up any red flags, and we've had long discussions with them about this. So we've not received substantial, we've talked to FDA's policy office. Nobody has pushed back on this provision. So next slide, and I think that goes to where we are in the Senate. Okay. So in the Senate, I spoke with Grace this morning. We understand that this will be a part of the manager's amendment for PDUFA in the Senate, so that's our understanding of where we stand right now. In the House, we met with Energy and Commerce this morning, and they're right now, and they are supportive of this. In John Stone's words, he likes it. They're just figuring out what the mechanism is going forward, and they're working with HELP right now to figure out what that looks like and how that works. So that is where we are with benefit. Again, if you're interested in joining us in support of this, we would welcome your support. We will be updating the sign-on letter, and we've been asked by our bill sponsors, Wicker and Klobuchar, to send them an updated letter and to get that over to HELP by the end of the week. And if you have any questions, my email is right there, and I'm happy to field questions either now or take them by email.
Well, thank you so much, Annie, and I apologize for the noise at the beginning of the call for anyone who's ever run one of these webinars we're dealing with. So I actually don't see any questions coming in. Have them. They certainly email Annie. For next, I want to turn it over to Lynette, who I believe is there in person with the folks in D.C. So we're going to unmute your line and hand it over to you. Lynette?
Thank you. My name is Lynette LaRue. I'm a retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, but the most important thing on that slide is I'm the grandmother of Barrett Tallman. We lost him about 5 years ago to sudden infant death syndrome, and that kind of propelled me into a world of dealing with families that are grieving. I was on the board of directors for First Candle for a couple of years, and I do a lot of peer and near-peer grief counseling. About 3 months ago, one of the moms that I work with sent me an initiative that was called the Farley-Kluger Amendment, and it kind of captured my interest, and I got in touch with these two gentlemen, and I am now advocating here on the Hill because I live in the D.C. area for the Sarah Grace Farley-Kluger Parental Bereavement Act. Next slide. The bill is such that would amend the Family Medical Leave Act to include the loss of a son or daughter from birth to age 18, which would trigger the ability to take job-protected up to 12 weeks leave to help them address the issues of grief. Most people don't realize that FMLA does not cover the loss of a child, which seems to be sort of an odd circumstance given that on the front end, the birth, adoption, intermittent care of a sick child, which probably your constituency is familiar with, and then military caregiver leave is built into the FMLA, but when the absolute worst happens and the bottle falls out of a parent's life, there's nothing. Next slide, please. So the bill has been introduced in the House since 2011, but it has not yet gotten a committee hearing, and it actually has to go before three particular committees: the House Education and Workforce Committee, the Oversight and Governmental Reform Committee, and the House Administration Committee for some reason. In this session, the bill was introduced bipartisanly by Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona and Brad Schneider of Illinois, which happens to be the home states of the two gentlemen who are the Farley-Kluger on this act. Sarah Grace was a little girl who died of ALL, and Kelly Farley lost two children preterm at age 20 and 22 weeks, which was before the age of viability. So he, in fact, would have not benefited from this bill. And Barry Kluger, who lost a 19-year-old daughter to a car accident, who, again, would not benefit from this bill because he is self-employed and his daughter was 19. The bill only covers birth to age 18. So I think it's remarkable that these two gentlemen have really stuck with this effort for the last 6 years, and actually before that even to get it to bill. In the session right now, the House bill has 12 additional co-sponsors as of June 11th when I wrote these slides, and it is clearly bipartisan, which is great to see. The Gosar staff member working this is Josh Ronk, and I put his email on there and phone number. And he is really actively working it and is pairing up an R&D and basically rolling out co-sponsors kind of on a weekly basis. Next slide, please. However, on the Senate side, a form of the bill has also been introduced since 2011 by the same sponsor, John Tester, and it was joined by 12 co-sponsors, all Democrats and/or an independent, shown on the slide here. But to date, there is no Republican co-sponsor. I don't know for sure the situation. I finally, after doing this for now 3 months, have been able to get the staffer who is responsible for it, Hannah Van Hoos, to take a meeting with me tomorrow. So hopefully I'll find out what the strategy is and if she is getting any sort of pushback. I know that I have been into, thus far, 12 Republican Senate staffers, both on the Health Committee and external to that committee, and they tell me it's the first they've heard about it in this session. I don't know the reality of that, but I know that they seem sympathetic, although to date I don't have a co-sponsor, and I'm trying really hard to walk in as many doors as possible. Next slide. So, again, I came to this several months ago offering, because of my proximity to D.C. and the fact that I'm a retired person and have plenty of time where the other two dads are pretty much working full-time, that I could do this pretty much full-time. And so they had, to date, these are the sponsors that they had, or endorsers, supporters that they had on the bill. And it sort of runs the gamut, but it generally is in the, sort of I would call it the grief space, either the people helping the grievers and sort of a narrowly focused set of folks. And it was really mostly folks that they could get a hold of pretty quickly and people that they related to. So since that time, next slide, please, I sort of took the approach that if you look at this, this is an issue that affects parents through incredible variety of circumstances, from losses at birth to loss at infancy to illnesses, diseases, accidents, incidents, suicides, gun violence, et cetera, all the way up to age 18 and, of course, beyond, although this bill is following the FMLA definition of a child, which is birth to age 18, so that's sort of the narrow factor there. So I started basically, Google is my friend, and I've gone out to anyone that will take a meeting with me. And so these are some of the organizations that I've gotten in the last 6-8 weeks. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which I think was a really big get, was looked at this as a victim support bill, and they were very supportive of it. Sudden Unexplained Death in Childhood Foundation, who I happen to know their friend, is a good friend of mine, and they're doing tremendous work in the space of children that die unexpectedly in death or in sleep, much the same as SIDS, but it's above the age of 1. Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, which is primarily a military-focused organization, but they do an awful lot in the grief space with grief camps, et cetera, and they are supportive of this sort of legislation across the board. Same thing with the National Military Family Association, less for military members, but for their spouses, many of whom, because of their military members' service, do not get the opportunity to always have careers unless they happen to be portable careers, so they're in jobs, and some of them, they might need the help of FMLA in the loss of a child because it's an economic necessity that they work. A big get for me was the Children's Hospital Association, which was 220-plus children's hospitals who see every day what loss does to families. Curiously enough, in reaching out to them, when I went marshaling my arguments, they walked in and said, we're going to support this. We just had this very situation for one of our staffers. So it really brought home that you just never know when this could happen to you. A National Children's Neuroblastoma Cancer Foundation, National Children's Brown Foundation, and what I would really like, and the reason that I reached out to, again, with a Google search to Max and company, was to see if I can add your name to the organization supporting this bill. Next slide, please. So as far as my approach, I have a BA in government from 1982, and that's sort of really the last time I really paid much attention to how things worked on the Hill, went into the military not thinking I'd ever need this. So I am truly the granny advocate, the basic amateur at this with those of you that are experts in this field, but I'm literally using my MetroCard 3 to 5 days a week, walking either up to the Hill in the Senate to meet with anyone that will take a call with me. I've tried to use constituent requests whenever possible, and when I can't find one, I just sort of send an email and hope for the best, and send an email 3 days later, and then another email 3 days after that, and eventually they take the, I think it's because they get tired of getting emails, and it's easier to take the meeting. But when I get in the door and I explain the story and I tell this, a lot of the reaction is, gee, I didn't know that wasn't covered. And I think that's really true for a lot of people. I think they assume it is. Again, I was initially targeting Republican members on the Health Committee, but I'm beginning to think that maybe they, since it's coming before them, may not be the ones that will initially sponsor. They might co-sponsor after somebody falls and on their sword and does this. So I'm looking at the first domino approach, and I'll take any Republican that I can to sign on for this. On the strategy front, the same thing for endorsements is Google. And I send them emails. I send probably 15, 20 emails a week, and I'm taking 3 to 5 meetings a week, so I figure 25% get is not too bad for a rookie like me.
So you got like 1 minute left.
Okay.
We're running out of time. Sorry.
Okay. I'm happy to do a telecon or to meet with you in person. Next slide. because I know that many of your constituents, unfortunately, are going to lose their children or potentially could, I consider you part of the constituency that would be supportive of this bill. So I'm happy to reach out to your organizations individually, happy to send you a background paper. And the bottom line for me is when children die, their parents will grieve, and this bill gives them a little bit more time and space to do that in an honorable way without forcing them back to work. It is unpaid leave, and it is up to 12 weeks. Many won't be able to take it, but at least it should be their choice, not having to go back to work to protect a job. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Lynette. We had a couple just encouraging comments come in from the chat box, so they're really just rooting you on, and your contact information was on the previous slide, so if folks want to sign on and support, please contact Lynette. And just as a reminder, we do have full recordings of these patients, so if you missed anything, we'll put the recording online, and you can certainly go back if you missed someone's email address or you wanted a bill number or something like that. So I want to move on to our next speaker now, who's Darlene Shelton, who's going to give us an update on emergency medication protocol. I am here. We have to unmute everyone's lines for this, so if you're not, please keep your line muted. That would really help us.
Okay, I'm here, Max.
Go ahead, Danny. We
can you hear me? Okay, hello. This is Darlene Shelton, and I'm actually another grandmother from Missouri. And we, due to our grandson being diagnosed with severe hemophilia, we realized that there are current protocols within our EMS and ER that prohibit administering of patient-carried meds, and also they're prohibited from deviating from standard protocols, even when those protocols may be life-saving measures. And so we started Danny Stokes, that's my grandson's name, and we currently were able to get legislation passed in Missouri. It is the very first state to pass legislation that allows, it actually allows for our regional medical directors to create protocols to pass down to the state. Because one of our requests was that we have uniformity in our protocols for our special medical needs individuals. And the only way to have standardization is to have the state-level EMS regulators be able to set those protocols. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Our overall goals are to have regulations changed within all of the every state in the United States, and as I said, Missouri is the first one who changed theirs. So you can see here on this slide, it's just kind of bullet points on the legislation that Missouri did. I will add, it does not have to be legislation because every state has a state emergency medical services association, and part of their job is to change regulations. Because of Missouri's regulations, we needed legislation. Our goal is not legislation first and foremost. Our goal is to change existing protocols on a statewide basis that will allow paramedics to follow the patient's emergency medical orders provided by their specialist and to administer life-saving patient-carried meds. So that's our primary goal. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. That if you want to read the exact legislation, this is the bit that applies to us. I will go ahead and say one of the things I really would like to do today is, again, create awareness for everyone in the rare disease community. Most people have no idea that these protocols exist and that you're not really protected. And I'm happy to get to announce that we are just beginning to work on federal protocols. I got the okay to announce that. So if you would like to know more about the federal legislation that we are getting ready to start working on, please contact me. Can you go ahead and, sorry, I should have done this differently. Can you back up 2 slides to my contact? We are going to be creating a task force, and there's my contact information. Cell is 573-820-2819. So we are going to be creating a task force to help with legislation wording and for fact finding to present the real need and the amount of different disease states and different individuals that are interested in assuring that we have nationwide protocols to pass down to our states. So I'm very excited about our progress, and happy to answer any questions and happy to talk with you all at any time.
Thank you for the update, Darlene. Not seeing any questions on the chat box, but Darlene's email is on the screen, so if folks have questions, feel free to email her. I'm going to turn it over to, well, not actually turn it over because I am the next speaker, so I'm really excited and happy to be able to provide a quick update on what's going on with newborn screening in Florida. Go to the next slide here. Very, very quick level set. I think most of us know why newborn screening is so important, but I think the bottom line is that the earlier you can diagnose diseases, the better outlook you have for those patients. So some cases it's life-changing, in some cases life-saving. But one of the challenges that we face in this country, every state has a newborn screening program, which is great, but there's very wide variation in terms of how many diseases are being screened for in each state. And the result of that, the outcome of that is that, in our view, way too many patients are falling through the cracks of the public health system, and that's because, you know, you might have a kid born in one state, but if a kid is born in the next state over, might not get screened for a disease that they have, and that could ultimately result in the diagnostic odyssey, and for many patients, you know, could result in permanent disability or death in some cases. So, you know, that's why we're so inspired to improve the newborn screening system throughout the country. And then, you know, I don't have time to list all of the challenges, but one of those challenges is that the way new diseases get added and screened for in states is often with individual pieces of legislation for one disease. But there's challenges there because for those who've worked at the state level, just in general, there's a lot of uncertainty when you're working with state legislation. It can take a very long time to get a bill passed, and then even if a bill gets passed, it's not always clear whether or not funding, this is really critical, whether funding will be appropriated to actually implement those new screens. So those are some of the kind of opportunities that lay with newborn screening, and also some of the challenges that we face. And then at the federal level, you heard about this in Becky's presentation. You know, one of the most important guides is what's determined at the federal level by the RUS, but I want to emphasize one word here, and that's that these are just recommendations. In most cases, these recommendations are not binding in the states, and it can take a very long time, 5 years or more, for the states to pick up on these recommendations and actually implement them and start screening for them. And all the while, you know, you have patients who are being born who are going undiagnosed with diseases that we have tests to diagnose, and we have treatments that have been FDA approved. So really we want to improve this situation. That the screenshot below is just a sampling of what the RUSP actually looks like, the list of diseases that are recommended. So if you skip to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about what we've done at the state level. So about 2 years ago, we started an initiative to really improve implementation of the RUSP recommendations in states, and to really, again, to ensure that babies were getting diagnosed as soon as possible, with the broader goal of getting them treated as soon as possible. So last year what we did was partner with patients and lawmakers here in California, where we are based, and very proud to report that we passed our legislation, SB 1095, which actually requires the state of California to follow the Rust guidelines within 2 years. So basically, when that law passed, it required screening for ALD, MPS 1, and Pompe, and so that will actually take full effect next year. So the state will begin screening for those in the summer of next year. So very happy to share that news. I think for many of you, you'd already known about that effort, but if you go to the next slide here, I want to talk a little bit about what we started doing in Florida. So last year we worked on California, and this year we decided to focus on Florida. We partnered with over 100 patient organizations, including March of Dimes, PPMD, and others who are on the call today. And really the goal of this was, again, to ensure that the RUSP is being implemented in the most timely way and that we're getting new screens added at the state. And so we partnered with lawmakers in Florida to write and actually pass SB 1124, which is the name of the legislation. It went through the entire Florida legislature unanimously, meaning no one voted against the bill at any opportunity, and extremely happy and proud to report that last week on Friday, the bill was officially signed into law by Governor Rick Scott. So in addition to our bill getting signed, there was also new funding included for actually the implementation of ALD screening, as well as funding to help improve the sort of infrastructure in the state of Florida to ensure that there's enough staff and the right equipment to make sure all these new screenings can happen. So if you go to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit how the legislation was designed to work. So basically it's a three-step process, and the signing date is basically what we're looking at as the implementation date of the legislation. So for new screens to be added in Florida, basically the first step would be a RUSP recommendation. It gets recommended at the federal level. And then that basically starts the clock in Florida, because Florida has its own council at the state level, and it gives them 1 year to review that recommendation and make a determination as to whether or not the state should screen for it. And so if that Florida council determines that the state should be screening for it and recommends that the state does that, it actually becomes a binding recommendation at that point, and that sets in motion the next kind of trigger, which requires the Florida Department of Health to actually request new funding for those screens and to actually begin screening within 18 months of the recommendation from the Florida Council. So the bill really not only empowers the RUSP to some degree, but it gives the Florida Committee a lot more power than it did before, and changes their what were recommendations into more binding recommendations that the state has to follow by mandate. But that doesn't mean that we're done in Florida. Clearly, every time that new diseases come before the Florida Council, there's an opportunity for advocacy. So there's still going to be work done there to make sure that the council is recommending new diseases for screening. So if you go to the next slide, I'm actually going to stop there. In the interest of time, would have liked to talk a lot more about this, but I'll pause very briefly in case folks have questions. You can submit them in the chat box now. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so if you guys do have questions, feel free to email me. And right now, I'll turn it over to Julia, in-person meeting, who's going to give some updates on our upcoming programs.
Thanks, Max. We do have one final stop for Rare on the Road next month in Portland on July 15th. We're very excited. We had our first 2 events, have gotten a lot of positive feedback from the patient community. This is in partnership with Global Genes and the AbRelay Foundation. Trains advocates about basically kind of from day one, what you can do to build your advocacy power, whether that be starting your own nonprofit fundraising, how to tell your story, and of course, very important to the foundation is why public policy matters. Most of you on the call already know that, but educating the larger patient community is critical for them to understand how public policy impacts the drug development process. Next slide. Next slide, this is more slides on this, I think.
we're out of time, but next slide. Next slide. Also very important, one of RDLA's awesome programs is in-district lobby days. Registration is open. We'll be scheduling meetings for any patient advocate to meet with their representatives from the federal level in their home districts. We hope to have about 200 patients participate this year. Please sign up, and we'll begin scheduling meetings very soon. You could advocate for things like the bereavement bill during the in-district lobby day. So it's an opportunity for anything that a patient kind of feels is a priority. It could be healthcare reform. I know that's a top huge priority for patients. So it is free to participate. You don't have to be a patient advocate. You could be a researcher. You could be a parent advocate or a caregiver that also wants to participate. Next slide. We kind of went over this already, but you know, it's really important for Congress to see that rare diseases, they're not diseases. These are actually people that are affected by diseases, and we want to make sure that we really build those relationships for patients and members of Congress. Next slide. Next slide. All of this stuff is can be found on the website. But all right. Last thing today on the agenda is that our Rare Voice Awards nominations process is open. We are accepting nominations from the community. We actually have one of our judges here in the room. And we open this up to the community. We're really looking for people who have been a voice and an advocate for policy for patients on the Hill. So, and we have categories, new categories in state-level advocacy for both the state legislature or the parent or organization, as well as teen advocacy, because we definitely want to train. We love grandparents to advocate. We want to also get the younger generation. I think they prefer to be called young adults, but I still call them teens. But we want to have recognize the great work that the young people in our community are doing. For those of you in the room, there's flyers here on these programs. Is there any more slides after that? All right. Sponsor opportunities for those of you on the phone from industry. We couldn't do it without their support. Any other slides?
That's it.
All right, thanks everyone. So we have about 100 people to dial in every month, and we'll have another meeting in July, which will be throwing in Sabah under the bus, and she'll have to do it all on her own. But if you have something that wasn't discussed today that you would like to be on the agenda, we're happy to include it. The agenda is always open.
I also, this is Max, I just want to take a minute to thank our team who helped put this together. I think we got through the webinar, I think 70 slides in just a little over an hour, so that might be a record. I also want to thank and acknowledge Grant and Hannah who you know, helped us get through the webinar today and deal with all the technical challenges. So really thankful for everyone who helped make today possible, and especially want to thank our speakers for sharing their stories, and certainly everyone else who called in today. So thanks again. We'll see everyone on the next call next month.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, excellent. Well, and then